if we look at a commercial invoice for customs purposes, is that if you make a customs declaration, and I'm sure you probably talked about Incoterms as to the responsibility of who that declaration is, whether it's the exporter or the importer. One of the main requirements in terms of making that declaration is a commercial invoice. So the commercial invoice needs to provide all the information to enable the customs declaration. So it is possible, if you're moving company to company, if you're using stock transfers or manifests, to draw that information together. So HMRC in the UK would say it is possible upon customs audit, if your stock transfer or manifest on, say, company to company, intercompany has all the information, that could be deemed acceptable. Now, as to whether an EU customs authority would agree with that is very debatable, but it could be whoever's making, if you're making a declaration yourself, then you need evidence of that through documentation such as a commercial invoice or a stock transfer with the various details. Normally, if you're using a broker or a customs intermediary, they will ask for that commercial invoice.
Okay, what happens in the case where you're exporting, but you haven't actually sold the product until the product arrives with your customer, who's going to inspect the product and then going to give you a price, you know, after inspection?
Yeah, I can see the issue there. In the import side, we've worked for a few companies in Scotland, and this is on the import side, where you can possibly make what's called a simplified frontier declaration. In the UK, there's the procedure, well, it's the EU as well, it's a procedure called Customs Freight Simplified Procedure, CFSP. It is used on the import side a lot in the UK, where if you don't have the full information, you make a simplified frontier declaration followed by a supplementary full declaration by the fourth day of the next working month. So that could be used, but the company using that is going to have to be authorized for customs, for use of that customs authorization. Now, it's possible that your freight forwarder can do that on your behalf. And I know there are clearly some big freight forwarders possibly on the call today who could actually use their own what's called CFSP authorization to make that simplified frontier declaration on your behalf, followed by the supplementary full declaration. So that is a way around it. But if you could either do it yourself with authorization, or you could work through your freight forwarder if they're able to do it on your behalf at the cost.
Okay, thank you.
And the idea of that, and we're not talking about the Trader Support Service in Northern Ireland, but the idea of that is the simplified frontier declaration only requires about 8 to 10 fields, whereas a full declaration requires 50 or 60. So if you have limited information, you can go back and complete it on the supplementary declaration.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, going back in relation to certificates of origin, if we're going to need or not need them, if we do need a certificate of origin, where can we apply for one? Is it the Chamber of Commerce? Yeah, so a certificate of origin becomes more important in the context of UK EU if there's a trade deal. So if you would do that, then again, if we're talking about the European Union, traditionally it would be for an accredited Chamber of Commerce. So obviously thinking about it from a Scottish perspective, there are clearly accredited Scottish chambers. In some parts of the world, you have what's called an approved exporter system. So Japan and South Korea would be examples. So with the EU and currently the UK, you can apply to become an approved exporter, and which is another customs procedure, and you would apply under registered exporter system, REX. Now, that is for any UK-EU preferential trade deal, Morocco, South Africa, Mexico, and it saves the costs on certificates of origin. Now, whether the UK will introduce such a system, no reason why it shouldn't, and whether it extends it to the European Union remains to be seen. But the concept there is, instead of issuing multiple certificates of origin, you almost self-certify because you are a registered and approved exporter. So again, once details are available, it could be that the UK will do that to save costs for UK exporters. Yeah, I mean, it's not only cost. What I'm worried about is in fresh product, if we're having to go through a third party like the Chamber of Commerce, you know, how are we going to get a certificate of origin on a weekend?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you're right. I think, yeah, I think that's an extremely fair comment for what you say. I know that, and you'll probably know better than me, that likes of DEFRA are looking at certain. I'm not going to say the words, certain assistance schemes at the moment. But with regard to certificates of origin, if the registered exporter system applies, it allows you to self-certify on an automated system as long as you're approved.
Yeah, as long as the other party in the EC accept that system.
Yeah, do you have a system at the moment?
Okay.
Okay, there's nothing in the chat box, Lucy.
Does anybody else have any questions that they would like to ask Kevin?
I presume you've gone through Incoterms and responsibility for declarations, or do you want me to quickly go through that? Or
Yeah, that would be helpful, just from my understanding.
Okay, so Incoterms ultimately determine responsibility for declarations and for VAT as well. So there are several sort of Incoterms, but within the context of the European Union, we probably think about it more of the lorry going from the seller's premises to the buyer's premises in the European Union, and who is responsible for the haulage, the booking of the vessel. Is it the GB seller or the European buyer? And it could be either. And it generally tends to be the Incoterms that determine that. So Incoterms should be a negotiation. And clearly, currently, for your current movements to the EU, it will be you or the European buyer. So you already have those established procedures for movement of the goods. What we have here now is customs declarations and procedures which don't exist currently, leaving aside even the tariff elements. So what you need to determine is which Incoterms apply. In reality, there's probably 4 Incoterms that it could be. There's 11 Incoterms as well. So it could be if the European buyer is responsible for the lorry coming to your premises in Scotland, then effectively it could be either Ex Works or FCA. Ex Works is probably the more likely one, which means the European buyer is responsible for collecting the goods at your premises and actually loading the goods onto the lorry. Whereas if they use FCA, free carrier, so free carrier Larkall or Ex Works Larkall, for example, or Inverness, then effectively, if it's Ex Works Inverness, the European buyer is responsible for loading the fish on board their lorry and is responsible for the declaration, the export declaration, the import declaration, and everything in the trade journey. If it's FCA, you are responsible for the loading of the fish and you are responsible for the export declaration in the UK. So there's a very clear distinction there between Ex Works and FCA. But for your European buyer, if they have to make that declaration in the UK, they are going to need a UK EORI number, which from next year will be a GB EORI number, not UK, and they will need a GB VAT number. So there's a lot of work and pressure there on your European buyer, if that's the case. And they may not be prepared to do that because there's a lot of work in getting a VAT number and a GB EORI number. So they might say, well, it's FCA. And you might say, well, that's fine. I'll make the declaration in the UK then, or Great Britain. And I will obviously do the loading of the fish as well. The other thing, and is which I do understand is a case, is what happens if you're responsible, whether it's a freight forwarder you use or whether it's yourself you use, you take the lorry across yourself, it's your own lorry that you own or you lease or rent, you take it across yourself. So in those circumstances, It could be either DDP or DAP. DDP is delivered duty paid, where you are responsible for delivering the goods to the French buyer, the Spanish buyer, the restaurant, the hotel chain, the market, wherever, you're responsible for the haulage, whether that's yourself or your freight forwarder or haulier as appropriate. You are responsible there in that regard. So that also means that you've got to make the declaration in the European Union, which is not so good. That means you need an EU REORI number and EU VAT number. Now, we know some businesses have been to the likes of Ireland and Netherlands to obtain that number, which is fine. But if you go to somewhere like France or Spain, you're going to be asked to have a fiscal representative, which is someone acting on your behalf. But you would also be responsible for any duties and VAT upon importation. That's quite a lot to take on under DDP. However, we do accept if you're selling to a small hotel chain or a market trader, they've probably got no interest in making the declaration. And you might think, well, I don't want them to make the declaration. Equally, if you're selling to a retail store, they might just say, take it or leave it. I want everything as it is today. It's got to be DDP. So there's a huge amount of work for businesses there, but it could give you competitive advantage. If you're doing it and your competitors in the rest of the UK are not doing it, for example, or GB, it could give you competitive advantage, albeit there's a lot of work to do. If it's DAP delivered at place, you are still responsible for the haulage. You are still responsible for the export declaration in Great Britain, but you are not responsible for the inbound declaration in France or Spain. You are not responsible for import tariffs or import VAT, which is clearly preferable, but equally your European buyer may insist that they don't want that, or they might, you might not feel they're in a position to actually be able to do that. So hopefully that makes sense. It raises the number of connotations, or how do I get an EU REORI number? How do I get an EU VAT number? I know some of you probably have already got that, which is great if you've got it. I know for you, those of you that haven't and need it, that we're hearing lots of stories, of difficult stories about what Irish customs or what French customs or German customs are now saying is you've got to have a legal entity, etc., etc. So again, happy to discuss any experiences if you're able or willing to share them. But this is becoming a huge issue, and it's becoming a big issue because if GB companies do not pay the duty and the VAT and there's outstanding liabilities, the European Union might get more dogmatic about it and say, legal entity status, I want bank guarantee up front that you're going to pay this, you're going to pay the duties. Which is why if you've got it already, that's a better position to be in than have to now go running around. The most favourable country at the moment seems to be the Netherlands, in that they're saying you don't need legal entity, you don't need a fiscal rep. Let's say that Germany is becoming more dogmatic on its position, and a lot of people were looking to Germany, and even Ireland are becoming a little more stringent than they were last year. But happy to take questions from anyone on that. Okay, nothing. That's great.
Kevin, I'll give you a quick question there. So if we're using an Incoterms DDP, I take it the custom clearance will be the first port of entry or first city of entry in the EC.
That's a brilliant question. Absolutely brilliant question. And I'm thinking of Calais, Cherbourg, Caen in that regard. What you can do, either freight forwarder or you could do it yourself, is you can use what's called a transit procedure.
A T1.
Now, again, if you do it yourself, there's a lot of work, but the idea of transit is that you have a known consignor status, which is can be your premises. They have to be visited by customs and approved by customs, and you need a port. Effectively, you're making the declaration at the final point of arrival, and you need a known consignee status. So that's the difficult part of it, that known consignee status, where you close the transit. Now, clearly, if you're a big business, you might have a European operation that you can apply for it, or a freight forwarder obviously can provide that for you. obviously at a cost, and assuming they're prepared to provide that. But it's fair to say that a lot of the freight forwards, and I would say in terms of fisheries, it's not an example used. It's other things like manufacturing goods to avoid the Dover-Calais concerns, and even other parts of France, is that you transit through France to the point of destination, such as Germany, Belgium, Spain, etc. But it does require a customs procedure, and it requires a financial guarantee to support it if you're going to do it yourself, or clearly your freight forwarder could do it on your behalf at a cost. But transit is going to be very, very heavily used for movements to Europe to avoid that customs clearance in France where there are perceived to be problems. The other thing to mention is, and for Scotland, I'm very conscious of this, if there's movements from, well, no, actually Scotland is not so much. If you're moving from, say, Holyhead to Dublin to Northern Ireland, transit will also be a procedure, but for Cairnryan to Larne or Belfast, less so.
Okay, so let's say it was the other way around. We use an Incoterm FOB, okay, and the importer, the buyer, decides to buy this product FOB product to travel with a T1 form to final destination, let's say Germany. So the custom clearance, even though it went through France, for example, would be Germany in FOB.
So if it's FOB, the concept of FOB is the goods are delivered on board the vessel. So for a lot of you that have your own hauliers, that is not going to work FOB for you. But I'm very conscious that in some movements, I guess certainly in Cornwall, there is a lot of FOB containerized traffic that moves from Dover to Calais. So I do understand it. What you'd have to do is you'd have to have the freight forwarder on both legs of the journey. It would need to be, and I'm very conscious of who the freight forwarder is who moves from Dover Calais under containerized. But I would say consolidated containerized for fish is another issue that does need strong consideration, especially if one part of the is inspected. It obviously has impacts for the rest of the consolidated movement as well. But so if it's FOB, you'd need but same freight forwarder to operate throughout.
Okay, I mean, I take it would be the same CIF and X-Works. It would be the same procedure if it's the buyer that's important.
With X-Works, it would be slightly different. So as you say, the likes of CIF, FOB, if you like, break the journey. Whereas X-Works, FCA, DAP, and DDP, it's a sort of end-to-end journey, and DPU, which is a new Incoterm. But so with all the others, you're breaking that journey. And the only way it could really work is if you have the same freight forwarder on both sides involved in the whole transaction.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, in theory, you can have the opposite of transit in Calais if you want. I guess, or Cherbourg, there's nothing to stop that, but that would be unusual.
Yep. Thanks.
Right. I'm conscious of a few things in the chat facility, not sure if there's any.
Yeah, there's one, but I'm not sure if this relates to the previous session or you. But I'll read it. It's from Josh, so you may want to unmute. We currently purchase goods under NGs from third-party countries. Will we be able to export these goods to the EU? I don't know if it's a customs question or not.
Yeah, I guess it is, and it is, and it isn't. Yeah, and apologies if I'm cutting across someone. So, if you're, and apologies if I've got this wrong and I'm wasting my time answering it. If you're importing goods from third countries, we call them third countries outside the EU at the moment. In theory, if it's subject to tariffs, you'll have to pay the import tariff. I'm not sure which third country. Can I just check? You're able to say which third countries we're talking about here?
Hi. So we currently import from China and Vietnam.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So China is the one being used the most. Vietnam, there may be I think it's trade continuity deals under discussion at the moment, but let's use China as the best example because it is the best example. So you're bringing goods in from China at the moment, you're paying import tariffs. There is no trade deal with the EU and China, and there's unlikely to be a trade deal between the UK and China. So effectively, you're going to be paying those import tariffs. If you import them and then you re-export them to the European Union, you may be able to undertake a customs procedure to eliminate the payment of the import duty from China. So that could be storing them in a customs warehouse, but clearly for perishable goods, that's not going to work. But if there are other goods that are part of the production process, you could apply for what's called inward processing. I know there's other procedures like end use as well, which you may be able to use. So end use is where the product fundamentally changes. So there are custom special procedures you can use, but let's use the example, you're bringing goods in as a component part, which may or may not be the example here, and you're then producing them to finished goods. What would happen then is that upon re-export to the European Union, you would not pay import duty and import VAT. That would be eliminated, and that's a well-known process. The difference we have here is that a movement to the European Union becomes an export from next year, which is not at the moment. So if there's a trade deal with the EU, and we're using this example not so much for fisheries, but for manufacturing, the UK gets big competitive advantage, which the EU is very concerned about on level playing field. In the EU, manufacturers and the distribution centres should become hugely popular. So goods brought in from China upon re-export to the EU do not pay import tariffs.
So, well, we currently buy goods on end use. So I'm currently doing this process, and
yeah,
end use now allows us to send that to the EU.
Yeah.
So I can currently do it. But come January 1st or April 1st, will that no longer be the case?
No, end use will still apply.
Fine. Okay, that's all. Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, another question again.
I've got another quick.
Oh, go on. You go, Ricky. You go.
Sorry, I just had. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, Kevin. You know, there's in some cases with third countries exporting to the EC, they use a Euro 1 certificate, which basically, you know, they don't have to pay tariffs that way. It's zero tariff. Come the 1st of January, depending on what deal we have, being a third country, is there a possibility that we have to export with Euro 1, or we can export with Euro 1? Have you contemplated that case?
Yeah, so from the 1st of January, the EUR1 certificate will no longer apply to the United Kingdom. It will be replaced by UK certificate of origin. So if there are preferential trade deals between the UK, so let's say Japan, South Korea, if there is one with the European Union, Morocco, for example, then you would have to get a preferential certificate of origin, which will be available from a Chamber of Commerce, accredited Chamber of Commerce, unless, and I've talked about previously, unless there's use of the Registered Exporter Approved Exporter Scheme, which businesses can apply for. If there is no trade deal between the UK and a third country, so let's say the United States currently, for argument's sake, then it will still require a full UK certificate of origin. So I'm using information predominantly from the London Chamber of Commerce, who would be probably the most visible in terms of their announcements on this, is the UK certificate of origin will look remarkably similar to the EU certificate of origin, or the EC certificate of origin as we know today. But use, as I say, of the Registered Exporter Scheme. So during COVID-19, HMRC have pushed use of their certificate of origin scheme. Use of Registered Exporter and a central scheme, further announcements in that regard, but that could simplify the process of obtaining origin certificates if you are an approved exporter. So any of you that have are approved by customs, have had customs audits, you are in a better position in theory, because you've already been approved for other authorizations from customs who know you already and know you have good procedures in place. Clearly going through it from scratch becomes a bit harder.
So what would be the difference between a Euro 1 certificate and a certificate of origin?
The difference is around the preference element of it. If it's a preferential trade deal, then effectively that becomes a UK preferential certificate of origin. If there's no trade deal,
Okay.
it just becomes almost like a non-preferential certificate of origin. So for countries like the Middle East, I know it might not apply so much in this instance, there is no trade deal, it becomes a non-preferential full certificate of origin, whereas an EUR1 is more sort of preferential. That's the main difference. Preferential in terms of a trade deal and tariffs.
Okay, I got you. Thanks.
And I had one again. I don't know if this is a customs question, but it's quite interesting. How are fishery products being dealt with if they're imported into the UK and not for human consumption? Is there a difference in the customs arrangements if it's for human consumption or not?
So, you may have covered this already. There is the border operating model, which the UK has taken a different view from the EU, and I know fisheries will not come into this, but for standard goods, you can defer your declaration for up to 6 months. Now, I know products of animal origin, which again is not entirely, might be applicable for some people on here, everything's been deferred until the 1st of April. Now, I'd need to check with fisheries as to whether fisheries, I think you might know whether the fisheries is the 1st of January, full import controls. I'm feeling it is, or whether it's the 1st of April. Yeah, it's the 1st of January, yeah. So again, as you may know, I'm sure you've gone through the IPAF system and everything. Just to confirm with Northern Ireland, if any of you move goods to Northern Ireland, the import pre-notification is through traces, the EU system, not IPAFs. And sorry, I'm sure Fiona, you've heard me say this so many times. Please sign up for the Trader Support Service.
Okay, so I said I don't know if that answered Richard's question or whether it was a question related to EHCs, in which case Greg has already answered it. Have we got time for any more questions, Lucy?
I've got 1 minute left, so last question for anybody.
I will now try and save the chat and we'll get back to anybody.
Hi, I've got a question for Kevin, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's actually on behalf of someone that's on the call that doesn't have a microphone. So, Kevin, it's about having frozen product in cold storage in the UK at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's about changing the labels and the pallets. Is there a grace period where the labels, the existing labels and existing pallets can be used, or would all pallets need to be ISPM 15 approved after from the 1st of January?
Yeah, so if the question is very much to do with ISPM 15 and heat treated pallets, any movements, first of all, to the European Union have to be ISPM 15 and especially heat treated, must have the ISPM label on, otherwise customs authorities and the border force will know immediately it's not there. Now, with regard, so if you're moving goods, say in Scotland at the moment, to the European Union, from the 1st of January, all has to be ISPM 15 specially heat treated. I'm terribly sorry there. And that's the same with Northern Ireland as well. All has to be ISPM 15 specially heat treated. And if they're not at the moment, unfortunately, they will have to be. Now, the argument is, well, could we let it try and go through the authorities and they won't spot it? I wouldn't take that risk personally.
Okay, thank you. The next bit was about it's the labeling element. So if all the stock that's in cold storage at the moment has GB labels, would those labels need to be changed to become EU compliant as well from the 1st of January?
So let's say the UK, like a lot of things, has taken a more flexible approach to labelling in terms of when in the EU producers continue to use labelling for a grace period. Let's just say at the moment that the EU are not being as flexible. It doesn't mean that the EU won't be, and it couldn't be negotiated as part of a trade deal, but as we're seeing with lots of things, and I'm sure you've probably discussed Jeffs and RMS today and AEO, as with a lot of things, let's say the EU proposals are being taken to the EU to show flexibility, but at the moment the EU are not being flexible. So the current working position, unfortunately, on labelling, I know it's a huge issue, is that it has to have the EU label, and the principles around food business operators, FBOs, the EU at the moment is not showing any movement. Doesn't mean they won't, because lots of discussions with the supermarket chains very heavily involved in those. Lots of proposals are being made, and I'm sure you've discussed those. But at the moment, the EU is not showing flexibility. Doesn't mean it won't, but it's not. So unfortunately, labelling at the moment looks like it must have the EU label from the 1st of January.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it is under discussion with the FSA at the moment. I think guidance is imminent, but hopefully that's in the next week.
Yeah, that's what we're hearing as well. we understand that there will be an EU ruling tomorrow on RMS and Jeffs.
Yeah.
We have been sort of indicated what the ruling will be, but I'm sure you know, Fiona, as well, or what the EU's response is. So, but yeah.
Yeah, hopefully more information at the end of the week.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're out of time, Lucy.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much, Kevin. That's been really helpful.
Nice to speak to everyone. Take care, everyone. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
thanks everybody for joining the call. As I said, we'll get back to you with a sort of Q&A after this. And if you have any further questions, please get in contact with us separately, and we'll do our best to answer them. But thanks very much, everybody.